Welcome to PACKOLUTION. In this podcast series, you'll hear the experts of the packaging industry talking about sustainability and the future of packaging. It is brought to you by Watron and hosted by one of its founders, Michaela Wachtel, and Sales Director Ton Kniepscher.
Welcome to another episode of PACKOLUTION, the disruptive podcast brought to you by Watron. Today we have Dan Coppins, packaging technologist at KMI Brands, as our guest, with whom we'll be talking about packaging in the special fields of beauty brands. Welcome, Dan.
Hello.
We always like to start off the episode with a short introduction. Dan, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your career path, please?
So I'm a packaging technologist. I have been for the last 10 years. My career path has been very checkered and interesting. I've worked around various industries in various fields. I got into packaging completely by accident, by temping, and I just fell in love with the field. I absolutely adore packaging. Over the years, as I've moved around and looked at different things, I've worked for contract manufacturers in health and well-being, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, food, and currently in fragrance and well-being. So I have a fairly good view on the way different companies do things and how they operate, as well as obviously the material choices they make. In recent years, the sustainability part has become a much larger part of the business, as for me, as it has for everyone, and a lot more time and investment has gone into this area. And I've become very, very passionate about the rights and the wrongs and the understanding, the greenwashing. So this is as much a job for me as it is a passion. I genuinely enjoy what I do. So I'm very passionate about what I feel is the right thing and the wrong thing to do. And I use a lot of science to refer to for what I feel is the right choices to make.
KMI is a creator of beauty brands and has been in business for over 25 years. What exactly is KMI doing and what the company vision on let's say, packaging?
So KMI have been innovative since the start. They started with some smaller brands and they've created new ones. So I think Naughty has been around for quite a number of years now. I've been with the business for just over a year. But looking at the history of what they've done, they've always tried to change the right thing. They were very innovative when sugarcane came into the field. They started moving along to that. They've always looked at and tried to choose the responsible materials. In more recent years, obviously, they've started bringing more expertise. I know previous technologists that worked there, as well as myself. And it's just that journey on understanding what actually is the best thing to do. How do we incorporate that? And how do we communicate that to consumers? They are growing very, very, very well. And the vision is to create products that are environmentally friendly and stable, not just packaging, but formulation as well. So everything is now starting to move towards an area where we consider every possible eventuality to make the best product for the consumer that has the least impact.
In our podcast, we always like to talk about sustainability. How important is sustainability in the beauty industry at the moment? Do brands genuinely pay more attention to this, or is it merely used as a unique selling point in the industry? So more like a thing that consumers want to hear. What are your experiences with that at KMI and maybe also in other companies?
At KMI, I have a very fortunate position where they do listen and they are very passionate about understanding what is the right and the wrong thing to do. So with KMI in mind, I feel very confident in progressing forwards. As an industry, it's a bit more difficult because there are so many variables around what is right and what is wrong. There's a lot of information and data around what is right and what is wrong from various sources, whether they are science-based or emotional-based is a big part of that. I think that everyone wants to look and feel more sustainable. It's just the way they necessarily go about that. Some will go with what the popular opinion is and they'll stick with that, without necessarily looking at the science behind it. And some will go through and work out the science and understand that. And actually, instead of just going the easy path, which is what the consumers are being told that they want, they actually try to educate the consumer on what the right thing to do is and what is actually more sustainable from a planet point of view. I think with this, there's a lot of education for consumers to be had. There is a lot of unique selling point when it comes to the right thing, and it is a difficult task because you will have different people saying different things depending where you are and what your experience is. I don't think there's a silver bullet to any of the issues that we're facing at the moment. There's a lot of collaboration we're going to need, and I mean a lot of collaboration across the industry. But it's being open to having those conversations. It's being open to have those debates about what is right and what is wrong, and being able to explain that we really need to work towards. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's still a lot of brands not necessarily paying attention to the science behind it.
I think that's a good point. But going back to the packaging for cosmetics and beauty products, what must be considered when designing packaging for cosmetics, and what are defining aspects? Because after all, of course, most cosmetic products are evaluated at the time of purchase solely on the basis of their packaging.
So with cosmetics, it's quite, the term cosmetics is a very broad field, a bit like saying food packaging. It's such a broad field of a huge sector. Yes. When we talk about cosmetics, there are different areas. Some are easier, some are more difficult. So if we're talking shampoo bottles, nice and easy, actually, because you've got a nice, easy monomaterial solution. When we're talking color cosmetics, when we're talking makeup, it is a bit more tricky, because you've got these devices that are multi-material mixed together, which means that they're not recyclable. They haven't necessarily got that sustainable story. These are the areas that need to focus the most, because we need to develop and design innovative solutions that are effective for the consumer, but also allow an end-of-life solution that allows the reuse or recycle and reuse of an item. And I think that's the biggest challenge we're facing at the moment, is changing from being an industry where you can use whatever you want, doesn't really matter too much, but then now we're thinking more sustainably. You need to consider what is recyclable, and if it isn't recyclable, why are we using it? It's asking that question, why? And this is one of my biggest points, and I hope you'll hear it throughout the podcast, but why is a question we need to be asking. Much more detail on why is the question we need to be asking about everything that we do, because without asking why, we can't justify the changes that we're making or explain the results. And then we can transpose these whys into a way that a PR team can communicate out to the consumer in the aim of educating that consumer into what we're doing in the industry to change and how that's going to affect them, what the requirement of them is, what the requirement of us is. A lot of consumers don't realize when we do make what appears to be a small change, sometimes behind the scenes that can be a multi-thousands and potentially millions of pounds of investment at the bigger suppliers of change on their machinery, in their supply chain to achieve that target. It's educating people that this change has cost us a lot of money, but we've done it because it's the right reasons. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. I don't think there's anything wrong with communicating that to the consumer. The issue is obviously with the issue we've got, certainly in the UK. I don't know how widespread it is, but we have a cost of living issue. I know Europe, we're struggling with the fuel costs. If we start trying to do these changes without passing the cost onto a consumer at all, there's challenges with the commercial side. And this is some of the issue with a lot of the environmental stuff, is it is a balance between doing the environmental right thing, but also we are businesses. We do need to make a profit. We do need to keep ourselves afloat, and it's keeping that balance correct. Sometimes the right thing isn't cheap, and so you have to take an interim step to get there in the future and just build it up over time a bit to ensure that you minimize the impact to the consumer.
What I hear from your answer is also the fact that there is a lot of correlation happening now between food packaging and the field you're operating in, which is non-food packaging, basically cosmetics, as you say, which is a rough covering name. But I think the trend for fit for purpose packaging is also being applied now in cosmetic packaging, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, when we look at the history of packaging, modern history, I mean, packaging has been around since the dawn of time, carrying water from a hole to your cave, essentially. This is still packaging. Absolutely. This is all, when we talk about modern packaging, we, in the last sort of few years, we started to change the views, but we've always been very siloed in our areas. We are cosmetics, or we are pharmaceutical, or we are food. We're seeing a lot more, and I try to attend more and more other expositions about various fields. So if I'm working cosmetics, actually, we should be going to the machinery fairs. We should be going and looking at food packaging fairs. We should be going and then visiting these places that do packaging outside our area, because there's so many learnings we can take from other fields. And I've seen this through working other things. If I'm looking at a vac form for cosmetics for a gift pack, which is still there's a market for, I need to actually find the most sustainable solution. Now, that's not in cosmetics at the moment. The solution there is very much we can be looking at vac forming from fresh produce. This is where the technology is really being honed and developed, and is great. We're looking at things like the milk bottle and the engineering that goes into something like that. We want that sort of technology in our field because it's so efficient, so well designed. That why aren't we using it in other areas? Why do we use so many different types of packaging when there's a solution just around the corner that someone else is using? It's just we can't see it because confectionery are using it, and so we don't have that visibility. It's part of the collaboration I was talking about. We have to work together with this.
You have to look over your eyes, correct? Yeah, I agree with that. So going back to cosmetics packaging, there are laws in place against deceptive packaging. I can imagine that in the field of beauty brands, of course, everything is subjective, but can you elaborate a bit on what we call on the content mogul packaging? So where the packaging actually suggests that it's bigger than it is.
In a lot of places, that sort of mogul packaging is strictly illegal now. You're not allowed to make an image bigger than the item that's actually in the case. The issue we still do have is obviously oversizing of cartons and things. Now, sometimes there are technical reasons for this. If you've got an auto carton erector that doesn't allow for such a small part, then absolutely, sometimes you might have to have something slightly bigger. As long as that image is still representative of the product inside, it's not illegal. The issue we are seeing, and it tends to be in much more luxurious areas, is that you can make a case bigger to make it feel more luxurious. And we see this in material choices as well, kind of using glass over plastic in some areas. The fragrance industry is a really good example of this. Is we use glass because historically everyone uses glass. It's a heavier material that costs more to transport. It costs more to create. If you're using 100% PCR glass, which is rare in the moment, I have seen it done, you are going to increase those credentials. But we as people have been taught for years that weight equals value. And if you take some of that weight out, you increase the, kind of improve the carbon efficiency. However, you lose that weight in the form of value in that balance. And I think that's one of the bigger areas of fragrance, that adjustment to what is easier and better. And I don't think that's something that we could do. We look after some brands as well in fragrance, and it's not an easy shift. That's where we need to make smaller steps, because if you make a significant step that is not in line with everyone else, consumers won't buy your product because it doesn't have that same perceived value. And we're also fighting against that as well when we think of sustainability.
I notice of various Scotch brands where the quality, the premium brands are packed in heavier glass bottles, whilst the same contents as the sort of normal brands, which is what the consumer associates, as you rightfully say. So that goes all the way through the chain. I
mean, there is an element of that that's decoration. Now, we have to remember that packaging is not just there to protect our product. It also is, that consumer-facing first instance of buying, particularly when you're looking at food. You can't test food on the shelf. You could, but you get in trouble, obviously. So we have to use artwork. We have to use clever design to enable us to sell that product without giving a tester of that product. That's where a lot of these heavier glasses are used, where you can get better defined decoration or etching or some sort of clever technique to make it look more attractive to the consumer. This is always going to be a place for it. But it's that weight that we need to work on, and how we use that decoration without adding that weight in, and just that conscious part of the carbon footprinting.
How high is the share of greenwashing when it comes to the packaging in the cosmetics sector?
I think that there is a decline in conscious greenwash. I think people are being more conscious about what is right and what is wrong. They're doing a bit more research, they're doing a bit more kind of understanding and reading it and getting to grips with it. I think there is a lot of unintended greenwashing. A lot of the move towards paper to replace plastics, people feel is the right thing to do. It looks like it's the right thing to do. But unfortunately, when you do the carbon footprint, the LCA analysis on these, it doesn't quite work out like this. And often the paper will be lined with either a very heavy varnish or a plastic layer, which would have to be removed before it can be recycled. So that you're actually effectively making a non-recyclable pack. One of the requirements of packaging for consumers is that it is convenient. Now, that's not just convenient to open, convenient to use. Yes, they're very important, but it's also inconvenient to dispose of. I had a conversation recently about a mixed polymer. We were looking at a product that had some PP and some wheatgrass, which is essentially PLA. Wheatgrass sounds much more romantic. So it's PLA and PP mixed together. Unfortunately, that's not recyclable. So we've asked for a fully recycled PP brush as an alternative to replace that, because actually, although it's a product that you would use and you'd reuse and you'd use again, it's still important to go and look at things and say, hey, what happens when we break it? What happens when we don't have a use for this anymore? We have to start considering where our source of our material comes from. So, where is it coming out of the ground? How is that processed next? How is it used? And obviously that's the bit we already know we do with our eyes closed, is how we get it from our suppliers through the supply chain to the consumer. But the next stage of this is something that we need to get better at doing and more concentration on, is how do we dispose of that? What's the end of life for that? What happens after it's left the consumer's hands and it goes on to the next stage? Is that recycled? Is it incinerated for energy recovery? Is it anaerobic digestion? Is it biodegradable? Is that the right thing to do? Or comments on that as well. Or is it going to landfill? Is this likely to be littered? There are a whole host of questions actually in development we need to be asking, because we need to ask why they're disposing it the way they are. How do we control that? How do we assist the responsible disposal of this? We're in a situation at the moment where we are taking more and more out of the ground, and commercialism is all about taking things out of the ground and selling it. We need to get to a place where actually we don't take it out of the ground, we take it from our waste resource. We use that resource again. We're not taking it out of the ground. We still make the world turn from an economic point of view, but we're not then abusing that resource from the ground. And that is difficult. And we see this in different sectors, the way they're looking at it. We've seen cars with battery tech. There are questions about the right way of that. We've seen, how existing stuff gets scrapped and reused. And it is a very complicated topic. And, when we're looking at rules and regulations that are coming in, some of them have been made without the necessary thought about their process. So governments are looking at this and making rules whilst looking at top line, not necessarily involving the people that actually are involved in this process and saying, this is what we need to regulate. This is how we need to legislate about this, but they're not considering their end of life or where it goes after them. So it'll be interesting to see where that kind of goes off to next as well.
Very obviously, greenwashing is a very broad topic with a lot of answers. So let's maybe get back to the point of sustainability, because you already said that the sector you're working in has many facets. There are different products we have to talk about. So are there different requirements for packaging in terms of the usage period of products? There are things that are used 1 week and then you throw it away, or 1 month and you throw it away. And then there are perfume bottles that you might use a year or two. For example, a shampoo bottle is used fewer times than a perfume bottle. Is there a higher requirement for sustainability placed on the shampoo packaging?
I think from a consumer concept, yes, because a lot of people see that as single use. However, from a developer point of view, no, these should have equal stead in requirements for that sustainability piece. I think the difference between the two there is the commodity of the item. I think that's where it different. The consumer expects different things, and this is what I was saying before: is if you make a big change to something that consumer deems as a higher value item that needs to have that veneer, that prettiness, then the kind of considerations for the item itself, the materials you use, is less important than it would be on something that is fast-moving consumer goods like your shampoos. These things need to be easily recycled repeatedly and require minimum effort from the consumer. When it comes to perfume bottles, I think that's all in design. We have to design to make sure that is recyclable afterwards. So both items have to have the end of life considered, but the usage experience is also really important, because this is how you define a successful brand and an unsuccessful brand. It largely comes down to the user experience, and that is packaging and formulation, and then what happens to that afterwards. At KMI, we're very conscious about our formulations as well. We are looking at only using biodegradable formulations, and this will enable the consumer, once they've washed their hair, rinse it out, that is going to go down the drain, but actually that's going to biodegrade and not be a problem elsewhere. It's like the packaging we're using. You throw it away in the recycling and they will recycle that. We know that we're using monomaterials to ensure that happens.
So no microplastics for scrubs, for example.
The problem with microplastics is it depends on the process where they've got out. And that's a difficult thing to control, as you will know. If the item is littered, then you have very little control. And unfortunately, littering is an intentional, most of the time, a very intentional act that brands cannot account against. And that's obviously not making excuses for brands, but it's more to do with the government's enabling consumers to have somewhere to put their recycling. So curbside collections in the UK are very good. We have a very good recycling rate. But when you look at the likes of the US, it's much the opposite. They don't have these curbsides in the same level as we do. It's not legal requirement like it is in the UK to have a curbside collection. If they did and they had the investment in the recycling infrastructure, their recycling rates would go up. The issue we're seeing with a lot of that is that we're having a lot of the larger groups in the media go and attack the kind of plastics and attack the recyclability of a lot of this stuff. And the reason they're doing that is because it's very easy in America, because recycling rates are so low, because they don't have that infrastructure. The requirement is an investment within that infrastructure to start that ball rolling, to allow them to have that material to reuse, to improve the pack, to reduce the carbon footprint. That's not always the message they're necessarily receiving, and that's not necessarily easy to do. And it's about helping them build that path and understand it. And it's very difficult when you're in the industry to have that voice to speak to the governmental bodies to say, what are you doing about this? How are you, this is a way that we can do it, and have that discussion. It's interesting when I go to some of these seminars, you meet, kind of university professors, you meet other industry experts, and you have these discussions. It actually turns out that a lot of us are very aligned on what needs to happen, but the commercials aren't always there. And that's what the biggest holdback is trying to work out the best solution with the commercial solution.
What I was referring to was the scrubs. There used to be a time a few years ago, when you had all these scrubs in cosmetic products, which were basically microplastics in the shampoo or in the product.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, they were banned, I think it was 2013, 2014, and rightly so. The problem is if you're putting microplastics straight down the drain, where do you expect them to go? They're difficult to catch because of their size. They can't be recycled because there's no collection for them. Things like that we need to be very conscious of. We shouldn't be putting in formulas at all. And I think the ban recognises that and addresses that issue. Not to say that microplastics don't come from other ways, and it is an issue. We know there's a lot of plastic out there where it shouldn't be, and I know there's a lot of schemes that KMI are involved with a lot of collection around the world. In some cases, we're looking to use that collected ocean waste in our products to stop it from being in the ocean, and then it will be recycled and reused again. So there are solutions to microplastics in the environment, but when it comes to formulations, I'm glad that it's banned. I think that needs to be a worldwide VAT ban if it isn't already.
That's a good point. Talking about recycling, of course, recycling with cosmetics is a bit of a special topic because you have a lot of non-recyclable parts in a pack, such as pumps. How does this look in terms of design for recycling? How are you working around this?
With pumps, it is a difficult one because they are a complex mix of materials. You can't curbside recycle them. You can send them to specialist centres. We've got in the UK collection points in some of the cosmetic retailers where you can take your pumps to get recycled. But it is a difficult one. We have got some companies out there who are doing great things trying to produce fully plastic pumps, which they want to claim that are recyclable. At the moment, they're not recyclable curbside. But there is development in that area. What we really need in the pump area is a completely out-the-box design idea that removes many of the components and makes it much simpler and into a mono material. Unfortunately, because of the way pumps work, that's quite a challenge. It's a technical challenge because, believe it or not, although there are pumps all around us every day, they're a very, very heavily engineered bit of technology. Yeah. And I don't think necessarily consumers understand how much work goes into a pump. And as such, all the individual components have to be manufactured by someone and then assembled by someone. The investment to do that is huge when it comes to changing a pump or making a new pump. So saying, actually, we need to scrap all the current designs for a pump and come up with something innovative that is a monomaterial is a huge, huge investment for a company. And we just simply don't have the technology at the moment to do that. I'm hoping that in the next sort of 10, 15 years, we will have a place where a delivery system will be provided that gives that consumer the experience they need of using a delivery system that is pump-like, but not a pump in itself. That's where we need to get to. But I'm not aware of anyone that's working on that currently in a completely alternative delivery system kind of point of view.
Everybody, of course, who goes into a supermarket is assured that for their food products they buy, there has been done a risk assessment for the product. Mm-hmm. How is this with beauty and cosmetic products? How rigorous is this testing, for example, of the packaging around it?
All the packaging, and the plastics will have to go through heavy metal testing and, make sure that they don't leach or anything. So every cosmetic item that gets produced has to go through a series of testing. So we do, first of all, you've got stability to make sure the formula doesn't break down on its own. Challenge testing, which ensures that the formula doesn't have anything that can grow in it. Nothing can grow in it, so you don't get mold or something in your product. Yep, and then for packaging, we do compatibility testing. And what essentially that is once we know that the formula is stable and it is safe and it won't grow anything, we can put it in the final pack and we can test to make sure the formula is not affected by the pack itself. So if it's sensitive to air, we have to make something that is airtight. If it's sensitive to light, we have to ensure that the pack is, UV blocking so it doesn't actually break down itself. But also we need to make sure that we don't have anything leach out from the bottle into the packaging or vice versa. I know cases where incorrect packaging has been used and you've had oils leak through plastic and it's actually made the pack on the outside oily, or you've lost the fragrance in the product. So this is why we do that testing, to ensure that the product is preserved for the consumer when it gets to them. But also as part of that, we will get certification from the manufacturer of the packaging to show that it has had testing and it is safe for contact. There are different grades, absolutely. Food contact items do have more testing. Cosmetics have less. But it's obviously, when you're ingesting something, you really have to make sure there isn't anything that can bleed out.
Another point that we would like to touch is refill systems. What about refill solutions in the beauty sector? Is the industry working on something like that, or will there ever be such a system in the beauty industry?
I think the simple answer is yes. I don't think there's a world where we won't end up with something like that. However, there are a lot of caveats about it. As we're looking at the moment, if brands all went out and did their own collection resource system, it would increase the carbon footprint of these items significantly, because you have to, once the consumers used it, they then have to post it somewhere, which is a single item being using carbon to move to another point to get washed, which is another carbon heavy process to then be sent elsewhere. The systems at the moment that work best are the collective systems, such as your Loop or Riri, where you buy from the store. It's filled for you, obviously pre-filled in the store. You use your item, you take it back to the store, and it goes through a collective system. At the moment, I think this is the most carbon efficient way of using refill systems. I don't think that they're at a point that is effective, because with refill systems, you have to have this high pressure and chemical washing process to ensure that you remove any contaminants within that pack. This is a very carbon heavy process and also very hot, so it limits the amount of what type of material you can use. Plastics do not work well in this environment. You have to use something like aluminium, which is a carbon intensive material that does a lot of damage when you mine the bauxite from the ground. So actually, when you start looking at the sourcing story of that, there are ethical questions. There are questions about that sourcing story and how much that costs. Obviously, if you're using recycled aluminium, 100% recycled, you take away some of the sourcing issues, and that's good, but there's only so much aluminium in circulation. Don't forget, we use this for other stuff, like automotive industry use this heavily. If you start using it in our industry, we're taking it away from someone else who's then going to have to mine some more. So there's a lot of balance with that. The way I think that is best at the moment with this is selling bigger packs. So I've done assessments on some of our products, and I've seen that if we sell a 250ml bottle or tube, and actually we increase that to a litre, we save about 60% in packaging weight. So actually it uses 60% less packaging to have a litre of product as opposed to 250 millilitres.
You only have one screw cup on the top versus 4 on the 250 ml.
100% true. Yeah. But overall the packaging, and that's including a pump. So the next step for us is obviously we take the pump off. We say reuse your pump, because that way we're not creating new pumps which can't be recycled. So these are all things that we consider and we look at and go, this is what we need to do. This is the right thing to do. These are the constant reviews. At the moment, I think we send it out to the consumer, they use the litre and then they recycle it. That will then become a PCR bottle. That for me is the best refill option that we've got at the moment, is actually to break it down and rebuild it. It takes the washing concerns out, because obviously when you melt down the plastic, it will burn off the contaminants and then it'll be fed through the process to create a new bottle. So you take that washing element away from it. It's in an existing system that we all use, that we all have at home. At the moment, that is the most efficient way of doing it. Now, that doesn't necessarily work in all markets, but where we sell primarily in the UK, that is our focus market. For other markets where this doesn't work, absolutely, these refill systems might be a bit more rigorous and effective. But I believe that, when we improve our systems and we stop shipping our waste elsewhere, we will process more of that. More material will be used for PCR, and we'll be in a much better place.
It sounds like you're already doing some really interesting steps in that field. But more generally speaking, do you think the cosmetics industry as a whole, let's focus on Europe for now, because that's what we can oversee, could the cosmetic industry step up their efforts to making more sustainable packed products on the market?
I think there's a requirement for development of the components themselves. A lot of the components in existence have been made, for a long time ago and developed. I think the industry needs to look at more mono-material solutions, or if you're going to use multi-materials, you have them as separate components. So, for example, a cap on a tube, they need to be two separate components, but that shoulder on that tube has to be the same material as the sleeve. This can go for compacts and all sorts. There are alternative ways of making these things. It does sometimes change the performance, and it does sometimes change the appearance. But this is where we need companies to start educating their consumer. We've made this change, and these are the reasons why. If the consumer is concerned about the change, they're concerned about the difference, and they're a little bit worried, we should be able to allow our consumer to reach out to the businesses. We do it at KMI, and I have no reason why people such as Coty or L'Oreal, they can do the same action and explain it to them. Have that conversation. Speak to them about why we've made that change.
Start the debate.
Absolutely. The thing for me is debate is the master of solution. I can develop a product with my expertise and my knowledge, and I can be confident that it is right. But I don't know, someone that disagrees with me and feels differently, I need to be stepping into their shoes and understand how they've got to their opinion, how they've got to their view on things. I need to understand what the consumer will think. It's fine me having that opinion. It's fine me having that decision and making the decisions based on the science, the technology that I know, that I possess. But I need to be able to, in some way, communicate that out to the consumer so that they understand and they have an opposing view to me. Let's have that conversation. Let's talk about it. Let's understand what your concerns are, and let's try and make sure that we put them to rest. Because I have had conversations where people have said things to me and I was on, you know what, that's a good point. We need to look at that. I need to investigate that and really understand that. I will come back to you. We have this conversation. I'm prevalent on LinkedIn. That's obviously where we met, Tom. And the conversations on there, and this is what I love about the platform, is it allows that debate. The majority of people will have that debate, have that conversation, and share their opinions. You will come to either we disagree and that's fine, or you will come to an action. Now, this is a better way of doing it. Let's start doing this from our two different directions. And I've met a lot of people that do that. You do also get the extremists who refuse to budge on their position, refuse to listen to reason or opinions.
Who glue themselves to the walls and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, even recently, I've had people actively, personally target me and try and discredit. And this happens. This is part of the game. When you stand up for something and you speak out, you will have people trying to discredit you. It's a well-known fact. But that's not conducive to a solution. I would much rather talk and investigate. I've been down to see Suez, invited me down to see one of their plants, and they've invited me to see a couple of others as well to understand the process in more detail. That enables me then to have that better armament, to have that conversation, say, well, actually, this is what happens. It also allows me to go back to the business that, KMI, and say, I've been to visit the site. We're making this packaging. However, I'm concerned that this is now a risk that we didn't deem as a risk before. We need to understand what those guys are doing. We need to share knowledge. We need to collaborate. We are in a very interesting place at the moment from a climate point of view. But if we don't start working together in a more effective manner, we are going to solve this problem. We're going to continue rolling down the same road. And in some instances, with some of the changes made, we're actually going to see things get worse.
As long as it's a fact-based discussion or debate, I think it's okay. You get into facts-free discussions, which are completely useless.
The problem with fact-free discussions is they're emotive. You either have factual or you have emotion. And as a industry, the media have been for quite a number of years, and I think it's well documented and well seen by a lot of people now, and increasingly obvious. There is a bad news sells mentality, and this is what we're being born into the world of extremists, but based on opinion, based on emotion. And we're using emotive storytelling to get a message across that isn't necessarily the right one. I've also seen a lot of data omission issues, which is greenwashing, but by omitting some of the data, you're telling a different story. And we've seen that on some documentaries that have come out recently where you're looking at it and go, okay, well, I understand that they're not lying about this. They're telling the truth, but they're also omitting half the details that would explain why. And it's that asking why that we need. We need that explanation of why to justify what's happening in order to find a better solution. It isn't conducive, again, to that collaborative working if we omit half the details or if we just go on emotion. We need to be more factual about this because we don't have a lot of time to make a difference. We need to slow down the change. We're not going to be able to stop it. It's never going to happen, but we need to slow that down to allow the race and the planet to evolve into this changing climate. We have to do this. There's no two ways about it. And packaging is a tiny part of this. But this is so much more widespread. A tiny thing will make a difference, but we all need to make these tiny changes in order to get there. And this is where this arguing, this emotional attachment to it needs to be taken away. We just need to look at the facts of this is what's making the difference.
I think these are some really nice last words. Usually this would be the point where I ask you to add something about what we didn't ask, but I really liked your last words. I think it rounds up our whole interview. Unless there's really something that you would like to add now at this point.
No, it's the collaboration piece is the biggest thing. I speak to people on LinkedIn every day about, all sorts of topics. And then I have phone calls when I'm going to do supplier visits and kind of working. I will take time out to speak to people. We did the same. It was just on a whim, we feel like we're talking about that same wavelength. Let's have a conversation. And that's where we went with this.
Exactly. Yep.
I do this with a lot of people. I have met some really fantastic people on LinkedIn. I've met some fantastic people through webinars, through kind of going to these shows, these conversations. This is what we need to have, because we need well-connected people who are working together to find a solution. And sometimes we need to look at things from a different point of view, from a different industry, from a different world, really, to understand, well, how do you do it in your country? How are you doing it differently? What works for you? What could work for us? What works for us that could work for you? It's this sharing of knowledge that is so, so important. We just don't do anymore. We've got to a point where commercialism is very much taken over, and these secret sort of pacts kind of arrive, and we don't want to share our patent, or we don't want to do this. Elon Musk was fantastic when he created Tesla. He open sourced his motor technology. This is what we need. The world needs more people like that who are willing to share and say, I'm not doing this for profit. Yes, I'll make a profit from it, but actually I'm giving you the tools to do the same that I've done. I've already developed this for you. Take it, grow it, make it better, bring it back to me and sell it to me again. This is what we need, is we just need clever people to go into a pot that says, these are all the solutions we've got. How do we improve them? How do we make a process better? And these are always evolving, and we need to work better together, because it's such an important thing. And I mean, out of all of this is what it comes to. My career aspiration is to make a viable and impactful difference to the way that we do packaging, the way we see materials. That's my career ambition, is to make a big difference and be lasting. I don't care if my name goes into history, but that's all. It's that impact, that change is the most important thing. And that requires that collaboration, because I can't do it myself. I'm just not smart enough. But there are people out there that can support making that change.
This concludes another episode of our podcast, PACKOLUTION. Thank you, Dan, for sharing your experience and vision with us. Very, very interesting. Hopefully for our listeners as well, but I'm sure they are. Please stay tuned in this channel for more inspiring episodes of PACKOLUTION with experts in the packaging industry. Thank you.